Welcome back. I'm going to show you some hints on how to solve the alien message board. Basically what they want you to do is, well, you can read the instructions, but they want you to type something in and come back with how many bad words there are in the message. Okay, so this is what kind of how I've started on this. Let me compile it. It's basically just a main class. And I have my scanner information. I try to scan something in. I like to do this where it has a post dot, or the post length is the post dot length minus 1. Otherwise I have to constantly remember to subtract 1 from the post dot length, and I don't know, I just have a hard time remembering to do that. So I like to do that right at the beginning so I don't have to remember. And then what I want to do is I want to count the number of times I run into this particular bad word, the bad word meaning the dollar sign here. So my integer here is just bad word, dollar sign. I'm going to start off with 0. I'm going to pretend there's nothing in there. So what I did is I made a while loop that counts from 0, like it says here, up to the post dot length. And this is why I like to do post dot length. So I don't have to think about it anymore. I know that this is going to go to the very last one. If this has 50 letters in there, I know this one is the 0 letter. And if there's 50 letters altogether, then this one must be the 49th letter. Let me change this actually back to here. Oh, I guess I don't need to do that yet. Okay, so this would be, if this were 50 letters, this would be like the, character at 49, for example. I just don't like to have to remember to subtract 1 all the time. Sometimes it just gets in my way. So what this does is it's just going to return the characters one at a time, just to see if at least I can do that. Remember, I told you I like to program by parts. So I choose the first step and then see if I can just accomplish that, and then add the next step and accomplish that, then add the next step and accomplish that. So I think the first step is going to be just, can I return one letter at a time to test to see if it's going to be a bad word. So right there it is. Okay, it seems like it worked out okay. I have the 13th letter is post length is 13. The character is D. If I look up there, that's exactly what I typed in there. And what I want to do is to see if any of these letters are a bad word. Let me give you a little tip. It's a real pain. Every time you run this, you got to type in a post over and over and over again. That gets to be pretty tedious. So what I tell students to do is short circuit this a little bit and just assign a post automatically to this that you can use for testing purposes. That's why I had a different thing here for when I was testing it. But so now I don't have to type it in all the time. That certainly saves me a lot of time. I could just run it and there it goes. So it goes all the way back down to the last little dollar sign, and voila, I don't have to type it in each time. In fact, let me adjust this a little bit. Okay, so now I kind of have it working. I know that there's 58 letters, or that's the 58th position, and the character at the 58th position is a dollar sign. I just erased it, so let's compile it and run it again here. It's an exclamation point, and that is indeed what I've got here. But what I've got to do now is I got to test to see whether or not it's a bad word. And if it is a bad word, I'm going to add 1 to bad words. So I'm going to do a little if statement, I guess, would be about the easiest way. And I'm going to say if post.substring okay, so I wrote this part in there. Post.substring equals, and then the dollar sign. Pay attention to this part. This part's important. And I compile it, and then I'm going to print out the number of bad words over here. So I added, if this is true, I'm going to add 1 to bad word, okay? And then I'm going to do C++ also. And then I'm going to print out the number of bad words. Remember, since this is an if statement, if it were true, it only does the very next statement. Here, let me make it a little bit more clear. Let me put curly brackets behind here, like that. So compile it. So if this is true, it's going to add 1 to bad words, and then it's going to go and test the next letter. Okay, let me compile it and run it. It should come up with, hey, it says 0. I know for sure there's at least 1 bad word here, and it actually should have counted these ones too, but it doesn't. Now the trick here, the problem with this is this equals. Miss Dovey told us that we can't use equals when we're dealing with strings. If you want to test to see if it's equal to something, you have to type, there's a function that we have to, a method that we use, and it's dot equals. Now notice what I did here is I combined my methods here, and what happens is it takes the word post, or the string post, and it retrieves the substring C, and then it tests this substring of C if it's equal to this letter S here. Now let me compile it and run it. Still says 0, and that's because I have another problem. I'm testing C to C plus 1. Remember, if it's C to C plus 1, when C is 0, this is 0, and then this is a 1 here. And this has to be 1 greater than the actual letter that you want. So for example, if you wanted to test the letters like ALI, you would have to find out the number of the letter E. This is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. 3 will go from 0 to 2. So remember that. If you forget, you might want to look up substrings just to remember how it is. But remember, this has to be one more number than what you want. So if I do like 2 of them here, hold on a second. Sorry, not 2 of them, but just 1 of them. And I need to do the same thing down here. C plus 1. If that equals that, then that should return a number for us. Let's see if that does it. Okay, now I've got 3. It's returning 3 bad words. But this isn't a bad word, right? This is a bad word, but this isn't a bad word. And it's basically because there's a space here and there's a space here. So what we're actually looking for is not $. We're looking for a $, space, dollars, or space, $, space. That's what we're actually looking for. And if we compile it and run it, okay, it returns 0 now. It hasn't found any, and that's just because it's looking at 1 letter at a time. We don't want to look at just 1 letter at a time. I think we want to look at actually 2 letters at a time, don't we? Let me think about that. Yeah, 2 letters at a time. So I think what we want to do is actually do 3, because we want to look at 2 letters. 3. Will that do it? Let's compile. Let's see. The thing I like about this is the echo printing that I'm doing, so I can tell exactly what the computer is looking at and testing for me. So compile it, run it. Okay, so now, so we run into another problem, but it is returning 3 letters at a time. So we're getting a lot closer, but you notice that we got this out of bounds exception. This happens a lot when you're dealing with strings and also arrays, and that is that it counted up to the post.length, which I guess was 54, but then when it returns a value down here, it returns a value that's 54 and then 3 more than 54, and we can't go that far. That's too far. We're testing like these last 3 things, and then it goes back and tries to test these one and that one, and then the next one, well, we've run out of room. We're overstepping our bounds, literally overstepping our bounds. So we don't want to count up to the absolute length of it. Let's count up to the length. Let me see, what would I have to count up to? I tested it here while you were gone, and what I had to do is I had to stop myself before I got to the very end here. So I stopped at 2 less, and this can be a bit of trial and error. Remember, it's 2 less because I've already subtracted 1 out here, and this has to you'll have to do a little bit of trial and error. Sometimes this doesn't always work out just like you think, but I stopped at 2 less, which is back here. So I get to FJ and then the exclamation point. And also when I run it, I just come up with 1 bad word. And that's right, because I just have this 1 bad word right here. And then I have these, but those aren't bad words. So it seems like it's working. Remember, if you do look at this, remember that when you turn it in, this is just for me. This is echo printing. And if you copy exactly what I do, this is helpful to learn what the computer is thinking, but if you turn this part into CodeRunner, they're going to take points off. They're not going to give you full credit. So make sure that you rectify these sorts of things here. There's one other thing that you're going to have to address, and that is that what happens if there's a bad word at the very end. So if there's a bad word at the very end, this is a bad word because there's a space and then there's nothing after it. So technically this is a bad word, but it doesn't fall into our pattern here now, does it? So you're going to have to deal with that, because I think if I run it, yeah, it still comes up with 1, and that's because it stopped at this point right here. So you might want to consider, what can you do to figure out if the very first part has a bad word and the very last part has a bad word, and maybe even the very first part. I feel like this should also be counted as a bad word. I think that, I'm not sure what CodeRunner would do, but as a programmer, I would certainly take this into consideration. So if I compile this and run it, it's gonna give me, yeah, just the one bad word, and that's because it doesn't find this one and it can't find this one. So that should get you started. This is a great technique. Again, this returns 3 letters. It tests to see if those 3 letters are a bad word. It adds 1 to the bad words. It prints it out down here. It goes and gets the next letter. It doesn't address the very last one, or if the very first one is a bad word. You're going to have to figure that part out on yourself. There's a couple different ways you can tackle it. There's a super easy way, there's a medium way, then there's a really long way. So the super easy way is kind of what I prefer, but I'm not gonna give you that hint. I want you guys to think about it. Actually, I had done it kind of like the medium way for years, and then this little girl in my class who wasn't real sure of herself about coding, didn't really like it, but I always liked to look at her code because she always came up with some pretty inventive ways to solve these coding problems that nobody else would come up with. And that's because she really didn't like coding, I guess, and so she came up with these ideas that would solve these problems in just a marvelous way. I just loved to look at her code to see how she handled things, because she's always handled things differently. So think a little bit, I guess what I'm saying is think outside the box on how can you figure out if the very last letter and the very first letter with a space is going to be a bad word, and try to do it as eloquently as you can. I'm always looking at eloquent code. I get a lot of students that will have a couple hundred lines of code dealing with each individual situation, which is another way to do it, but I like to see code very dense and concise. So see how short you can make your code, see how many times you can add things onto each other, like using the, when I added those things on. I could have done this in multiple steps, but I didn't. I just did it all in one step. I kind of like to see that. You can do it any way you want. Any way that CodeRunner will accept is okay by me. Just see if you can't get to be a better coder, though, by making your code more and more dense. Well, I hope that helps. If it didn't, ask your question on Piazza, and you can always watch this video again.